Welcome to the Painting Insights podcast. We have been working on something in the background.
That's right. We've actually started a Patreon channel. For the last couple of months, we've had previous guests revisit the channel to give us additional content, everything from studio tours, sketchbook tours, talking us through the process of paintings and all kinds of additional treats, which you're exclusively going to see as a patron who supports the channel.
So by supporting us on Patreon, you help the channel keep going. There's a lot of work put into this, from the video editing to the sourcing of guests. So you really help us find those guests and to put the content out.
And we have lots of content planned for the near future. So the links for that will be in the description of this video and in the description on the podcast channels. And otherwise, you can go on to Patreon and type in Painting Insights Podcast and support us that way. Thanks very much. Enjoy the video. Okay, so would you mind introducing yourself for the audience, please?
Yes, hi, I'm Lisa Lebofsky. I'm an artist who previously was nomadic, and now I'm a feral painter living in New York City.
So that's the first thing I'm going to have to ask you about. What's your nomadic journey been?
In 2017, I pulled up anchor, put everything into storage, and took off with no clear plan, and that went on for over 3 years with no end in sight. And it was really, and I'm sad that it ended, but it had to for a variety of reasons I'll get into. But I realized I'm from the Hudson Valley, just outside of New York City, but I lived in New York City for about 12 years at that point. And I went through a personal upheaval and realized I didn't need to be in New York City anymore. So I left and went to Newfoundland with a 6-month plan, loaded up my car and my cat, and with an intention to live in the places where climate change was happening, where you could be at the forefront of it. I mean, it's been happening in New York as well, but obviously I wanted to travel the world. And I'd previously been in Antarctica and the Maldives and Greenland, but I just wanted to really live that life, and being in a place you can better understand the changes happening in that environment, not just from the physical observation, but interacting with the people that live there, and hearing their stories, and then bringing that into the painting process, and then having more conversations with people and spreading the word some more about what is happening in the planet, and noticing that all of our stories are rather similar, no matter where we're all from. So, and I basically residency hopped was primarily what I did, but I also would just put it out there and ask people like, hey, does anybody in this area need a house sitter or a cat sitter? I was a living cat nanny for a while. That was great. Eventually people just started coming to me and saying, well, I know that you've been doing this thing. Do you want to stay at my place? I'm going to be gone, or we have this extra room. We'd love to have you there. And that just kept presenting more and more opportunities for places to stay and visit. Primarily, I was in North America because at the time I was traveling with a very elderly little old cat, so it had to be somewhat accessible for her, so she could fit in my car, and she was good with travel. But yeah, that wrapped up in early 2020, not because of the pandemic, surprisingly,
Yeah.
but because my little cat, she was old, so she needed palliative care, and I couldn't keep traveling for her. And then randomly, by good fortune, I got a job offer back in New York City that I couldn't refuse. So I just, in February 2020, I moved back to New York City just in time for the pandemic.
Wow, what an amazing journey. Well, I'm curious now, what's one of the places where you think it was most apparent to see the effects of climate change that you visited?
No, I've never considered that. Gosh, it's hard to say because it presents itself in so many different ways. And it's interesting because I'm going to say New York is actually the shorelines. I know you wouldn't think it, but it's probably just by circumstance of having spent the most time here. But because sea level rise is not ubiquitous across the world, and certain areas of the world are seeing it more than others. And because it's not just the ocean just rises, there's a few factors. There's the overriding currents of the ocean where it brings water to, and then proximity to receding ice sheets actually affects it as well, because as the ice recedes, there actually is a somewhat gravitational pull towards the water, towards the ice. So as that goes away, that actually unleashes even more water. So it's this real domino effect. So the Northeast, the eastern seaboard of the United States up into Canada is slated to see some of the highest sea level rises in the world. And, you know, that was apparent. The one everybody talks about is Sandy, but then we also recently had Ida. And I spent a lot of time focusing on the shoreline of Long Island, and there's been so much erosion. And there's one spot in particular I go back to almost every year, and it's rather remarkable how much it has just eaten away and disappeared. And then on that note, just issues with because it is getting warmer here, and seeing how that is impacting trees. I have a cabin upstate that has this beautiful black spruce tree, but they're all dying around here because they're made for a cooler climate, and they're just not able to withstand the heat. And then invasive species, I mean, that's been happening for centuries. But you do see that all over, you know, primarily from the movement of plant matter with trade and so forth. You know, that you know, there's been issues with invasive species, but then there are also the warmer climate ones are moving further north. So just the proximity of to the ocean, and then also with the you know, the temperatures rising, I'm noticing a lot here. But the Maldives would obviously be a very obvious one. You know, but it's been some time since I've been there, so I almost feel a little strange talking about it. I was there in 2013. It's so funny. I had a dream about going back there just 2 nights ago. So I was like, oh, I guess I got to go back.
It's calling you, yeah.
But they're the lowest the lowest laying nation in the world. They're right on the equator, and the highest point I believe is 1.5 meters above sea level. So they for sure, you know, they were impacted by the 2004 tsunami. At the time, people were already talking about making moves to leave the country. There's a lot of attitudes about it. Again, I can't speak authoritatively because it was 11 years ago. But some people, and, you know, discussing people and their stories, you know, some people were getting ready to leave. They're like, this place is going to go. Others believed that the coral would somehow rise and protect them. So others thought that it wasn't a thing, or they just had faith that the seawalls that they were building with the tetrahedron seawalls would help them. The student we met with kids there, they're very well educated about climate change. I was rather impressed about that, just because it's you know, so poor here, so poorly educated in the United States. So, I mean, depending where you are. I mean, I grew up in a science household, so we're the first family on my block to have a recycling bucket in the 80s. Like, we were all over it, but you know, in certain places like the South, you know, I've spent time in central United States and in the prairies and in the desert areas. And it's interesting, some of the conversations I've had with people. It's like, wow, we have extremely different perspectives about how, you know, aside from the you know, the environment is evolving, but also how, you know, government agencies run. So, so it's like kind of remarkable, but anyway.
Well, it sounds like you moved to New York in 2011. Would that make sense? You say, is that about right?
No, I moved to New York City proper in 2004.
Oh, really?
And then left in 2017.
I see. Okay, so where were you before you lived in New York?
I grew up in the Hudson Valley of New York, and that's pretty much where I was.
Oh,
so
sorry,
just outside. Yeah. So just 20 miles north of New York City. And then I went to university just a little bit up the Hudson Valley, and spent all my time in the Catskills hiking. And just, yeah, that's a real part of my identity, which makes sense as a landscape painter because we have the Hudson River School of Painting, which was the first internationally recognized art movement in the American art movement in the 1800s. And I think that that is in my DNA as a painter.
That's lovely. Well, in your 3 years of travel, that one, when you told me when you'd been from 2017 to 2020, how did that impact your art practices? You know, either physically or mentally or emotionally, how has that impacted you in the way that you make work?
That's an excellent question. I learned a lot during that time because I didn't have a stationary studio. I don't think I was anywhere for more than 3 months, and I think that's even saying a lot. I can't even think of a place. Oh no, yeah, okay, 3 months. I'd say 3 months was max for where I ever was at any point, but usually it was about 3 weeks, and then I'd be off to the next. So that really forces you to think compactly and in boxes. And I was living out of a car during that whole time. So it was really what fit in my car is what I had. And I got rather creative with easels and so forth and ways to hang art. So there was an immediacy of just really knowing my material and just being able to set up wherever I was. And during that time, I started painting a lot more on paper because it is so lightweight and takes up very little space. And I still very much work on paper, but I also work on aluminum, which is, I think, my main, what I'm mostly known for. I've been doing it well, not the longest, but it's something I've investigated for over 20 years now. And canvas linen. But definitely started working a lot more with paper at that time. And you know, because that all stemmed out of a personal upheaval, like my perceptions of the world changed, but also my mark making changed. And in a good way, I'd say. My work became a bit more emotional, I'd say, a little bit more freed up. And also my thoughts around what I was making certainly changed. Because prior to that, when I was visiting places like Antarctica, Greenland, and the Maldives, like I'd mentioned, and others, I was thinking it more of like a documentarian way. So it really was like taking these photos on site and just, really, but then thinking of how to translate them in paint. But with being nomadic and having the luxury of really having this, the gift of time, serious time in these spaces, I was able to really think about the immediacy of the mark and the moving landscape in front of me. I mean, I was always a plein air painter and traveling a lot with that, but just the fact that I was so mobile, I was really just reacting to the energy of the space rather than like the documentation of it. So I wasn't painting a literal space, but more the sensation of space, especially because what I would take from these places to bring into larger studio work, when I had the opportunity to have a larger studio, which I don't always have, I would take those marks that I came up with in those places back to the studio. So eventually, like, the photo was irrelevant that I was using to document the space, and it was just really about the perception of the stories, thinking about the stories, thinking about the mark, and so forth when I brought it back to the studio.
That's lovely. Well, your reels have captured your lovely dexterity with the brush. Is that something where that's one of the confidences that grew from the immediacy that you described a moment ago? Is that what you meant? Yeah.
Yeah, and what's interesting, it's also me tapping into my childhood. I was rather fortuitous when I was very young. My parents did. I knew when I was 4 years old that I wanted to be an artist, and my parents sent me to art school when I was 6. And I happened to study with this woman who taught Chinese watercolor, and I studied with her for 10 years. And the school was off in the woods, and there was a waterfall behind, and she would take us outside to paint in plein air and paint the moving water. And so I was doing this as a child, and using that calligraphic style of painting, holding the brush further back. It's a very light touch. I used to also play violin. I realized recently how I hold a brush is a bit how I used to hold a bow. I was like, oh, that's interesting. But just that very light grip and just like really going with the calligraphy and letting the brush say what it needs to say with, like, the absorbing what I'm seeing, having it come in through me and exit through my body through a dance through the brush. So really tapping back into that. And I think for me, really letting go of being so committed to image, like a pre-made image that the photo had captured, really allowed me to bring that freedom back into the work for me. Because it really was just like, I guess I never thought of this before. I guess when I'm out there, I'm kind of developing my choreography, and then when I'm in the studio, I'm just bringing it back, remembering what I learned out there.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, also, you mentioned earlier about painting on aluminium. How did that come about? How did that develop?
So in undergraduate, I actually studied, because I had studied painting for all of my life, pretty much when I went to college, I wanted to study something different. And the school I went to actually was one at the time, maybe still is, one of the top schools in the United States for metalsmithing. And I fell in love with the material. And so I was studying metalwork for 4 years. And I kind of thought I would pursue it, but I had an epiphany one day. I went to the scrapyard to get this aluminum scrap, and the surface was so pristine. There were these old lithography plates, so they must have been anodized. They had some sort of rainbow sheen on them, and they were so like sexy that I didn't want to hammer into them. And so I was like, what if I just start painting on these? And then I just started. This was the late '90s, so the internet was around, but it wasn't like the it thing.
Yeah.
So I just was kind of figuring this out on my own without much information. And then over time, I started connecting with other painters who were using the material similarly. And now today, like, because there used to be no information, I'd have to get the stuff at scrapyards and build my own panels. But now you can get all of these materials. Just there's art conservators that carry these things. Various art supply stores have these various kinds of aluminum panels. But for my metals background, I really learned how to prepare the panels so that they are truly archival and, can really grip the paint. There's a whole like sanding, etching process I do to prepare the surface for what I like. But where I developed it and what I think was so attractive to, aside from it initially being this sexy material, was I do paint transparently in several thin layers. I'm a rather indirect painter. And I let the aluminum come through. I don't understand the purpose of painting on aluminum to cover it all up. I don't know why people do that. A lot of people do, but that's I don't understand it. Like just use a panel. It's a little bit more tried and true. But because I'm leaving the material showing through, it also harkens back to that childhood training where I was doing watercolor. And to me, I paint as if it is watercolor, even though it's oil paint on the aluminum. So there's these several thin, transparent layers, very intentional with what I'm leaving showing through. And what shows through, it reflects light differently. So, and I find that perfectly captures the subtle changes of light that happen when you're out in nature.
Mm. Oh, that's wonderful. It makes me wonder when I look at your account on Instagram as well, how being a cat mum affects your practice, because they're so playful, and I can see that you've got this lovely little black cat that you've had for a couple of years. And yeah, that's got to, I mean, I have a friend fairly local to me who's taught me a lot about painting, and she's got a cat through me who introduced her to someone where she adopted this cat, and the cat now feels like my daughter and her daughter at the same time, so I always look after her when she's away. And when you paint, she takes an interest and wants to sit right next to the painting and bat at your paintbrush and, all kinds of playful, sweet things. Is that, I suppose it's kind of, my question would be, are there remnants of the cat in your painting? Will there be cat hairs and claw marks and things that you think that's her signature? I'm leaving it in there.
Yeah, this guy is kind of good. He's not too hairy. My last cat was quite fluffy.
Yeah.
We're all over everything. But even his hairs occasionally show up in the paintings, and rarely. He's a bit more wiry, but But I just say, you know, because also as a plein air painter, everything gets stuck in my painting. There's bugs, there's dust, especially being nomadic, there's so much schmutz in my paintings. Like there's just, you know, and things get smeared or there's like weird things that happen. And I'm just like, you know what? It's a part of the story. Like this painting did not get created in a vacuum. Like this is inherently what it is. It's part of its accent.
Yeah.
So yes, yeah, there are marks. You know, it occasionally, because my last cat was good. She kind of stayed out of the painting more or less. This guy is very, he's just always doing things with his paws. So he's definitely like up in there and very, you know, so occasionally like gets into the paint, but it's pretty rare. But he did, like the other day, he did step on a painting that I had just varnished and it left a little, just like the most subtle paw mark. And I left it. I was like, you know what? Love me, love my cat.
Yeah, I love it. That's fantastic. Oh, that's so nice. Well, you're very generous with your space of promoting other artists, and I love that. So, is that something which you've always done, or is it something which you're more conscious of with your profile growing online, or where's that come from?
I mean, I think it's something I've always done. But for sure, like again, 2016 was rather a pivotal year for me in my life, which, you know, led to me deciding to take off. And, you know, and I was voluntarily living in isolation for much of that, because part of the reason I needed to leave is New York City's great and all, but it's like I grew up in the woods and it's a lot of noise and there's a lot of events and there's a lot of stuff going on. And I really just needed to heal. And I was like, I just need to turn off the noise and take off. But, you know, I'm saying art isn't created in a vacuum. It doesn't exist in one either. And I've always been a real supporter of community. And I'd say 90% of my career that I have now is for sure from, you know, where I went to grad school. I went to the New York Academy of Art, and they have such an, you just graduate such a large community there because it is only an MFA program. So you graduate with 30 other artists, and then they have all these alumni opportunities. So, you know, so even when like I was going through my personal upheaval, I started teaching there. Like I knew I had this community to lean into. So it became out of necessity, realizing like, oh, I really need these other artists. And then living in isolation, that's also when I had an intention to grow my social media presence because you know, I wasn't there. I wasn't at the parties. I wasn't at the events. And I was like, well, this is a way I can be present. It's when I started my whole hashtag Ask Lebofsky series, which I still occasionally do. And it was just a way to share the stories and just be in touch with people and feel like I was still relevant. But you know, yeah, like it's I think community for an artist to grow, it just, you need to have your people. You know, every gallery I've gotten has been through word of mouth. You know, many of my patrons are just people I've met out, just going out and meeting people and creating connection, and then nurturing those connections. You know, and making sure that I'm always giving more than I'm taking. I think that that's essential for an artist because, you know, every artist is having a hard time and struggling. So why not help each other up? You know, there's that expression, a tide rises all boats, something like that. So, you know, I really believe in that.
No, that's brilliant. You've mentioned a couple of times about an event that occurred where you wanted to pack up and leave. Would you mind discussing that briefly, just to tell us what that was?
Sure. I was married for 16 years, and we had 15 great years, and then one strange year, and then it was over, like really, literally overnight. And it was very jolting and heartbreaking. I was quite blindsided. And so in that process, I had the gift of art to really lean into. And I was, you know, I think I had mentioned I was creating this show about the disappearing. Well, I don't know if I mentioned the show, but I was making these paintings about the disappearing shorelines of New York specifically, and so it's, you know, southern New York, so like Long Island into New York City. I, as I'm working on these paintings and leaning into them and thinking about what was happening, because I didn't live anywhere for a month either, because it just really was so sudden. And I was just staying on friends' couches. So again, the benefit of community. I think this is when I really like the community thing became so important for me, because I was staying with other artists and friends from from a long time, and just while I was like, oh my God, what just happened? What's going on? And and like just trying to get my footing again. So it was as if I was just, I always thought of this vision of I was on a boat with this person, and suddenly they dove overboard, and I was like, so I dove after them to try and save them, and then they got entangled in something and they wouldn't let go, and I couldn't, I had to leave and save myself, and just like, so I just it's very poetic during that time.
Yeah.
And then and then I was painting these oceans, so I was like having these visions of trying to understand my life, like these with the ocean, and then and then painting these oceans, and as I'm working on these paintings, and started realizing that the story of climate change wasn't just a story about like disappearing landscapes. It's a story of hopeful human triumph in the face of adversity. So then and in my own pain at the time, I was able to translate that into a greater story that everybody can connect to and understand. Because it's more than climate change. I mean, our environments are constantly shifting, whether it be the greater planet or our personal home life, or it could be a loss of a career, or it could be a pandemic, or it could be so many things that are shifting in our lives that we have to reconfigure and set with. So that during that time was like, so I literally got knocked off of my whatever. And just had to like kind of really shuffle and hustle to figure everything out. And then once and I was putting together the show while the divorce was happening, and and I'm trying to find a new home, and like, can I figure it out financially? Because I like kind of lost everything, because I just wanted to start over. And it was just a lot of turmoil. And that's why afterwards I was like, I need to just leave and just kind of regroup a bit and figure out who I am as a person and as an artist. And then in that just grew this great appreciation for these friends I had, and then just really making sure that when I met lovely people in my life, to really keep in touch with them. Like, that's such a gift to meet amazing people, and why wouldn't you want to just keep in touch and keep these relationships going and keep in contact, and and promote them in any way that you can, and help them in any way that you can.
Well, I'm sorry to hear about the one strange year that you had, but well done to you for saving yourself, as you said in your analogy. I was wondering if, and this is possibly, I don't know if this is going to be poor taste, but I was wondering if the disappearing shorelines is something which mirrors the disappearance of the kind of, the shoreline of the relationship, and it echoed that in that way. Or, how did the show go? Did it feel as though it was analogous to emotional issues that you were, contending with at the time?
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting because the show was it was in a very rarefied space. It was in a federal courthouse in New York, and it happens to be the building where I got married.
Oh, wow.
So it was so loaded, and I kind of wanted to cancel the show because again, during part of the show I didn't have anywhere to live, and it was so hard to, and then it was so emotionally loaded, and for like the location of it. And the majority of the work I did create during that, but most of it was, I never actually considered it. A lot of it was during the last year of my marriage, and during that time I started making these floating icebergs that were kind of just severed and floating in space. And as I painted them, I would spray them with water, and the whole painting would melt. So I was destroying the painting as I created it. So it was this, but they were severed and just floating with all these drips coming down. And I never really thought about that as kind of what was happening with my relationship. Because the last year was strange too, because even though there was like this real distance that had evolved between us, that we also, in a lot of ways, were closer than ever. So it was very strange. It was very strange, tender, sweet time actually. But again, once reality presented itself, it was rather personally nightmarish. But I think there was this like grappling of just because I was at a loss for a year. So just painting these severed, drippy icebergs, and then these oceans that were becoming more tumultuous or were just vanishing or being eaten away, and these aggressive waters that were just like pouring in. I think I was feeling that. I do say, because my paintings since then have actually become a bit more foggy. I think back then they might have just been more tumultuous. But since then, there was, especially during the 3 years of not, the 3 years and then coming back to New York, there was really, they became a lot more foggy. Like the shoreline, the horizon line, the horizon line eventually disappeared. Like this painting here has a horizon, but this is a commission, so it's a little different. But eventually although I'll actually say a funny story about that. But the horizon totally disappeared from my paintings because I just didn't, I didn't have a home, so voluntarily at that point. But when I was nomadic, but I started joking with people. I'm like, if you want to know how I'm feeling, just look at the horizon of the painting. I feel like these are self-portraits at this point, self-portraits in ocean. So I think you can hit the nail on the head there.
Oh, wow. Oh, well, I love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Please, yeah. Please.
Yeah, in relation to this one, just because it's here in the back. So, and also tying into what we were just talking about with the importance of community, so I've been working on this commission for the last 6 months, and then and it was actually the horizon originally was a little bit blurred out, like it was just fog, and it was a lot more monochromatic, this painting, and then I just had knee surgery, and I'm sitting here recovering from it. It's been 7 weeks now, not that I'm counting, and where I've been mostly living in isolation again. And after a few weeks, I was able to start working on this painting again. And I found as I was moving through my recovery, because this was made up. So as I'm working through the recovery, I started I put in this sharp horizon because I saw like the light at the tunnel of my recovery. And then I was like, oh, and it needs to be a blue sky. So I put this blue sky. I started warming up the waters a bit more and adding more colors. So I was like, oh, I guess this is reflecting my healing journey now.
Yeah.
But through this journey, I've had artists. Most of my friends are artists, so every day I've had another friend here visiting me, which is 7 weeks is a long time, and I quickly realized at first I was like, oh, how am I going to do this on my own? And I was like, you know what, I always run into people, and they're like, hey, we should get a drink sometime. So I was like, I have a perfect time. Come to my apartment. Come hang out with me while I'm convalescing. And it's been so lovely, like just seeing the outpouring of support. And now I'm more determined than ever to give back in any way I can,
Yeah.
And as people have come in, I've been like, well, let me help you with this problem with your website, or let me answer your question about social media, or yes, I can give relationship advice or whatever. What can I help you with? But then also all these artists, I'll totally be promoting their work over the coming months. So.
Oh, that's lovely. I mean, I also notice it's not only contemporary artists, but you've also got a love for sharing an appreciation for classic artists. I mean, obviously, very emotional artwork from Katie Colvitz was one which you posted recently, where you'd visited that, which I absolutely love Katie Colvitz's work as well. And it's, cries out in her work that she makes that it's, so emotionally severe in a way, really, to see the subject matter she covers. And I appreciate the way that your work does the same, but not in such an overtly graphic way, in more subtle cues in certain areas. And I'm wondering whether it's your travels have developed or shifted or affected in any way your color palette that you use.
Oh, for sure, for sure. A lot of things influence the direction that my work takes. And just bringing it back to the Colwitz show, that I mean, I was as a young kid, or teenager, I was very aware of her work, but I guess I hadn't really revisited it in a long time. So it was so oftentimes going to see an art show will reinvigorate me. Like I also remember seeing this pair Kirkby, and I hope I'm saying his name right, exhibition a couple of years ago in New York City, and it just coming out of these and it just reminds me like, okay, the power of this mark and like the compositional cues and the way that they're utilizing like in Kyle's work, like the horizon, like she just in the way she pushes all the figures right up into it and keeps everything below it. And there's all these things that invigorate and excite any artist, I'd say. So for sure I'll see cues from other artists and I want to bring that into my work. But also in the travels, I mean, there's like the slightly more obvious of, if I go to a place and I notice a color that's different than what I'm used to, than bringing a paint into my palette. For example, I had a residency at Shenandoah National Park, and I had gotten this Vasari brand. I don't know if they're international, but they're a brand of paints. Actually, they're in New York, but I got there. They had given a talk at my grad school, and I got a tube of their olive green. And I had it for a long time. I never really fully loved it. Like I used it a little bit in Italy. Like it really kind of worked nice for olive trees. I was like, okay, but I never really found a place for it again. Especially in Newfoundland, like it just did not work for the palette there. For there, I was like, oh, green umber, Old Holland's green umber works really great for that palette. So I kind of left this olive green for a while. But then I was doing this residency in Shenandoah National Park, and the just like the haze, because there's a lot of smog there. So it was like a whole interesting investigation and thought process towards towards my art making that I hadn't considered. Like, oh, how does smog affect a landscape? But looking at the colors there, I was like, huh. So I pulled out that olive green, and again, it's only their olive green. If I get olive green from any other brand, it's gonna be quite warm. Theirs is quite cool. So it's this very specific olive green. And mixing that with nickel yellow, like, oh my gosh, it was like 100% that landscape. But then I try applying that in other places and it's not the same. So there's definitely like the virtue of being able to spend time in a space that is of a certain palette and having that challenge of finding that palette is, I enjoy that. In a way, which is funny for me to say, because I'm not really known for being a colorist. But I do love color. I mean, I wouldn't be a painter, I suppose. I would just only rely on the power of the mark and draftsmanship. Draftsmanship. But the other thing that's come up is, meeting other artists. Like for example, nickel yellow. I learned about that color when I was in Italy, painting with a bunch of other artists. And one of them said, "Oh, have you ever used nickel yellow?" And I said, "No." And I bought a tube while I was in. I think I got it in Florence, and that's like a permanent on my palette now. Another time I was a keynote speaker for an exhibition at SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design, and I was chatting with one of the professors there, giving a demo for some of his students, and he's like, "Oh, have you ever used Sennelier's chromium green light?" And I was like, "No," and he gave me his tube, and I was like, "Oh my gosh!" And now that lives on my palette. so there's also just learning from other artists. Which I guess goes back to even learning from the masters and, artists before us. Like, so there is learning from the landscape, the challenge of, dissecting what that color is in the landscape. But I think so much of it comes from other artists.
Mm. Well, this makes me wonder now, if you're willing to, would you take us through all of the colors on your palette?
Yeah, buckle up.
Yeah.
So because I'm a plein air painter, and I have a bad knee, which hopefully will be better now. I do often hike far to find what it is I'm going to paint. I often don't know what it is I'm going to paint till I get there. So I have a very small easel or push-out box that I have, and I just carry all in a tiny little backpack. In the backpack is a water bladder. I usually have a snack, and I don't usually, I haven't been using plastic, but sometimes with a plastic bag, usually the silicone bag, just something I can seal any food waste in, because sometimes I'm isolated and there's often bears. And I've had many encounters with bears over the years. I'm okay. And they're all black bears where I am, so they're quite easy to deal with. But anyway, so I just don't want to deal with animals. And I have a bug spray and my tripod, a stool, and no paints. I bring almost no paints with me, so it's just brushes, and I have a pre-squeezed out palette. So I will share with you that palette. So, and then just like small sheets of paper. Everything's very small, like usually 6x9 or smaller. That's all I'm carrying. So it's all very lightweight and packed in my backpack. Um, and it's nice because where the water bladder is, the pack I have, it's stiff and it kind of serves as like a little drying rack when I'm done. So
That's good.
yeah, and I will drink all the water and it's out and paintings are in there. Anyway, so you have all my secrets. And I'll maybe carry a couple of tubes of paint, but I basically have it all squeezed out before I go. So the way it goes is starting in the top left corner, I use titanium white. Currently, this is the current palette as of summer 2024. It does change frequently. So currently it's titanium white. Then going down the left side, I'll have my tinted blacks or grays. So I'll have, depending where I am, usually I have indigo, Winsor & Newton's indigo, blue black, Payne's gray, and that's it. So that's just going down the side or like the darks there. And then going across the top, I alternate between warm and cool for each color, for each hue. This is something I picked up for one of my professors in grad school, and I rather like it because it takes some of the thinking out of it. If I'm very consistent of which color is on which side, so it's always trying to think of it right now. It's sometimes switch it up, but I think it's warm on the
left.
No, it's cool on the. I do cool on the left, warm on the right as I go. But again, sometimes that changes. So I'm pretty sure that's what I have right now. Yeah. So I go ultramarine blue. And again, this all changes depending what's going on. Usually it's Prussian blue. Currently it's phthalo blue because I misplaced my Prussian blue. But I have to get a new tube. But this is the problem with being nomadic. I still identify as nomadic. I have 5 studios, so I constantly am like, I don't know where I left that paint. Wow. I try to have multiples, but that's expensive. So anyway, so ultramarine blue, Prussian blue ideally. The greens have kind of split into 3 now. So, and I just started using a new one. So right now it's currently Prussian green, which is new in the last few months for me. Prior to that, it might have been a phthalo green or none at all. Then either green umber or that Vasari olive green, which are both very different. One's warm and one's cool. So it kind of depends on the landscape I know I'm in. And then the Sennelier green light. Chromium green light. Then I have nickel yellow, and then cadmium yellow light. I try to avoid pure cadmiums on my palette. I do have a cadmium that's like not real cadmium, although currently I think I have a real cadmium on there. So sometimes that happens. But when I'm out planning, I do try to avoid it because if I get paint on me, I can't wash my hands. It's the whole thing. Then it kind of breaks down at this point to my mood. So the blues, the greens, and the yellows are always pretty consistent. But then either I'll go right into the oranges or I might go into the less chromatic yellows. So what might happen next, which I think is currently on my palette, is I'll then do either gold ochre, transparent gold ochre, or transparent yellow oxide, one of the two. Also, it kind of depends on the landscape again. Like Newfoundland, where I spend a lot of time, that for sure is transparent yellow oxide. I find, most other places for the transparent gold ochre, but it depends. So, and then I go into then I have my, then it really just falls apart. Then I usually have my chromatic. I stick a little chromatic in there. I have cadmium red light, which hardly gets used, but occasionally I paint a sunset, and it's great for that. And and then red ochre, and then there's 2 colors that I've been alternating on this. It's either Caput Mortem, or I have this artist friend, John Sabra. We met because I think he reached out to me because he paints on aluminum. And this is way back. And we found that we both were kind of doing a similar thing. It was like the collective unconscious thing. We both were doing a similar, our work's very different now, but there was a time when our work certainly had an overlap. And so we've totally bonded on materials since then. He's like a real materials guy, and he created a series of, and he's an environmentalist as well. So he's created a series of paints where it's actually made from toxic runoff from mines. He actually goes into the landscape. It's based in Ohio, and there's been a lot of mining there. He actually goes into these super fun toxic sites, and obviously geared up appropriately. He's been collaborating with Gamblin oil paints, and I don't know if they are where you are, but he created a series called Reclaimed Earth Pigments, and by pulling this toxicified earth out of the landscape, they pull the paint in the process. It detoxifies. So he's created paint from toxic mine runoff. Like, how brilliant is that?
Amazing.
So that color, the one I've been using, I think might just be called purple. I'm not sure. Sorry, John. It's not within reach, so I can't.
Don't worry, I'll Google it. It'll be on the screen.
Yeah. I think there's like 3 or 4 different pigments that exist. So it's the one that's comparable to a kaput mortem. So I use one of the two. I like the Reclaimed Earth one because it's a little bit more oily and more lightweight inherently than a tube of kaput mortem. But sometimes I like the density of the kaput mortem. So it depends on the mood. So that's next, and then I have ultramarine violet. I like to have on there, and which I hardly use. Sometimes I do. It depends on the landscape. Like I remember in Italy, I used it a lot. And now lately it hasn't been getting as much use, so it depends on the landscape. But I'd like to have it there, and because when I need it, I really need it, and when I don't have it, I'm like And then, last but not least, my favorite is, and this I'm very specific on the brand, is Schminky Mussini's Asphaltum.
Oh wow!
Which is a very warm, transparent brown, but not too warm. Like Gamblin's version of it is too warm for my taste.
Well, you did say buckle up, and that was a hell of a ride.
Sorry, guys.
No, that was fantastic.
Oh, wait. Skip it.
It's a big geeky section of the podcast where we love to go through people's palette, and sometimes we're just not prepared for how expansive it is. That was fantastic, though. Great explanation of not only where it came from, but also your mindset and your certainty for its utility still on the palette. But yeah, because the olive green has such a specific usage for smog, I'm wondering now whether the lecturer, was it, or tutor who'd given you the chromium green light, was it? Yeah. Does that have a specific utility, or is that just handy to have for mixing, or how do you use that?
It's good for mixing. I mean, I guess there's times I've used it straight. It's such a nice, warm, but not too chromatic green. Now, I do know if there's plein air painters listening to this, they're probably like, she's using green, because a lot of plein air painters are very much like, mix your greens, which I get. And I do that as well. Like I'll use my blues and my yellows and mix my greens. There's less paint to have on there. It's rare that I'll bring a green paint with me. Like I mentioned, I'll sometimes have a couple tubes with me, and I'll tell you what those are. It's blue, black, asphaltum, maybe the transparent yellow oxide and white. Like that would be it. Because from those 3, I can pretty much get everything, because the blue, black, and the yellow, whatever it is that I'm using, can make some sort of variation of green. Because again, I'm an indirect painter, so a lot of these paintings are underpaintings that I'll later add pigment to, or whatever, however I'm going to build it up. I also draw. I should mention that. I do a lot of charcoal and other materials sometimes as well, just for ease of speed and sometimes I paint very precarious places, and I only have like, okay, I'm going to have 20 minutes before I'm fried or whatever. So, but anyway, so that particular green, yeah, I never really had, prior to that green being on my palette, I don't think I had a warm green on there. Like I think the warmest green I had was the Old Holland green umber, which, I mean, it's warm, but it's not like super warm. So I think this is the first time that I've had something that I can identify as a yellow green on my palette. And it's been great, because I do find myself in the last few years a little bit more drawn to painting greenery. I don't know if that's because of the green. I think it's just, the locations that I'm finding myself in. which is funny because I never was interested in. Yeah, I like painting dead things. So green is life. So I don't know what's happening here.
It's a
Guys.
predicament if your palette starts to dictate what you're painting.
Yeah, so and I don't
Greens,
know.
I
I don't
have
know
to
which,
go.
yeah, I don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg. I have no idea. So I don't know if it's this green that I'm like kind of interested in. And it's so funny because when he showed it to me, I'm like, I will never use this green. And then it just found itself in there. And now I'm like, oh, I can't live without this green.
Wow,
So,
that is interesting. When you started, it was with titanium white, and you clarified that your palette changes. Have you tried different whites, or have you always had titanium?
I'd say in the Wayback Machine, I for sure did. You know, this is a, I mean, maybe not a surprise for anybody who knows from what my grad school is, but my background is actually as a figurative painter. Not in the way back machine. You know, as a kid, I was definitely painting the landscape, you know, the Sumi inks and stuff. Like I was very, you know, very landscape oriented. But then I got into jewelry, and that got me interested in the body. And then the New York Academy of Art, when I was there, it was called the New York Academy, the New York Academy of Art Graduate School of Figurative Art. So like that was the name of it. They've dropped the last part a while ago, but I was very involved in the figure, and for that I was using more of a lead white for sure. But when I would go into landscape painting, again, there's my tendency to not want super toxic paints when I'm out in the field. But also the lead and flake whites tend to be more transparent, and you know, the way I use white is in a very opaque way. So, and titanium really captured that. But I had a conversation with an artist recently, which kind of had me start thinking differently about it, but I haven't applied it yet. Because an issue with titanium is it is quite, despite it not being called flake white, it is quite flaky. So,
Yeah.
like when you scrape it off your palette, it just chips away and stuff. And I do like a paint that has, what I like about titanium is it does have like, when it dries out a bit, it has like a very heavy drag to it. And I do utilize the surface, but like I'm very into the surface that I'm painting on. It becomes integral to the paintings. I'm not a real impasto painter necessarily. So it does have a nice drag across the surface, but I used to love a painting that was more plastic or stringy or what have you, and that you can really get from your lead and flake white. So I was chatting with a painter who made this beautiful landscape painting. We were talking about it, and he was telling me how he actually mixes his titanium white with a lead white to get that. And so I want to start playing with that again and see if that makes sense, especially for some of my waterfall paintings, to have a more stringy paint application. But I just haven't gotten around to it because I've been painting at home here with my cat while I'm recovering from the surgery, and I don't want lead paint here. And because he's pretty good about staying out of the paint, but again, he'll sometimes like pot things. So I really don't use any cadmiums here. Like I'm really using paints that I know won't get him sick. So,
Yeah.
but maybe, you know, something I practice in one of my other studios that are free of him. I might start playing with that.
Yeah. Well, only for the mercy of the audience will I stop asking you about color, because I could do for another hour, but I won't. But what I have been holding on to as a question is when you mentioned the painting behind you, you'd said that that's from imagination. Is that made up? Did you say? Yeah. No.
Well, most of it,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah. If you
Okay,
could.
so so it's uh so I paint the landscape I paint almost every day. So, and I've done a lot of plein air and a lot of sitting with the water and coming up with the mark and the movement and understanding the rhythm and so forth of the water. So when this person came to me with this idea for a commission, they were like, you know, they actually saw a painting of mine that they liked, but they wanted it on canvas and with a different palette and more of this, like that was from a gray day in the Maldives or something, this painting that she saw. And she's like, well, I want this to be more of St. Lucia and, you know, the palette here. And like, you know, so she had all these thoughts around it, but she's like, but I like the waves up here with like the foam in the foreground and some coral. And I was like, okay. So I kind of like relooked at some of the compositions from, because I didn't have anything, because I had spent time in St. Lucia last summer. So I didn't have anything like that from St. Lucia that I personally painted or thought about. There was like a couple of pieces I did, but not over open sea. And so I looked back at some of my images from the Maldives, and I found this composition, which I was like, I feel like this kind of has the feel of it. So I used it for like the initial thought of the layout, but that quickly, I did the first three passes were completely abstract. Like this started on a yellow ochre canvas. Then I put I think I put on a green, like phthalo green, and then I sprayed that with water to kind of like, or not water and mineral spirits to kind of make this, watery, water-based looking texture surface to work on. So the little bubbles also grip the paint in a certain way that's nice. And then I, put a layer of black on there, and probably blue black. And then I did like some blues and did the same thing. And then I kind of like sketched out with some white paint where I wanted the waves to be. And then after that, the photo went away. So the photo was there when I like kind of sketched out the waves with some white, like just kind of loosely put them in. And then after that, it's just been me kind of reacting to what's going on and the colors and, just sitting and thinking about it. And occasionally there's been moments where I put the white foam in the foreground, and I was like, I don't know about that. So I sprayed it with mineral spirits again, and then dragged my brush across it with water. So that did all types of crazy stuff. And then went back with the brush to like create some more textures. So just kind of like letting the brush and the surface and the feeling dictate what's ultimately coming forward. I recently, like all the whites were on there, and I was like, this is too white and it's too monotonous. So I went in with some phthalo, some ultramarine blue and indigo, and put in these shadows and cooled things down. And now I'm going to go back in with some probably Payne's gray and some white and change some more stuff, and then go back with the white calligraphic mark making. So it's got a few more passes on it, but it's like it's been changing. It's been evolving.
That's incredible. I mean, is it something which you've done before? Are you quite comfortable inventing beyond the reference? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Because I feel like plein air painting allows for that. So I'm looking for my cats here, and if he gets close enough, maybe I'll. Wow. I was like, maybe I'll bring him into the picture. Plein air painting forces that, especially when you're painting a waterfall or the ocean, or like if you're just like, so many times the tide has just come in while I've been out painting, so the landscape disappears. Like it's this, the sun is moving, so like plein air painting forces that. Like you have the general composition, but then everything that's on the bones is completely shifting. So, I think plein air paintings completely trained me to do that in the studio.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Well, to shift topics a little bit, I need to ask about, what has your experience been with galleries? Do you exhibit in many? And if so, has it been good experiences? Have you had mixed experiences with them? And can you tell us about?
Yeah. I've definitely had some horror stories, and I avoid them now.
Like what? Can you tell us like what it is? Because I mean, some people won't know how things go wrong, and I've tried to share things which I've experienced with some galleries that are just unforeseen issues that you can have.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and keep it broad.
Okay.
So I mean, obviously, personally, I've never really. I'll also talk about some stories I've heard. I've never had an issue with payments. I've had some take a while, but I've never had totally run into. Yeah, I mean, I've heard horror stories about getting paid. I don't think I've ever had that actually, which is good. But I've had, definitely scenarios where I just don't feel like I totally trust them. And, I've seen sometimes I see my work that's sold like listed back again, but at a higher value than what they sold it for. And I don't get a percentage of that anymore. So that's kind of, this is the problem with being an artist. We're the last unregulated market. So everybody else gets to make a buck off of us, but we're not seeing it. So I know there's been many attempts to change that, but it just hasn't happened yet. So, but I've definitely seen that happen, and I've had concerns where I'm like, I feel like they might be charging more, and I'm still only seeing the initial price I gave. So there's like concerns about that, just not feeling a comfort in communicating. And I've definitely been pitted against other artists that have been brought on, or they've even had, and that's not great. You don't want to show at a gallery that has someone that makes work very similar to you, especially if there's a price differential. I've been undersold for sure. I've had stories come back to me from collectors where they're like, well, we know we like Lisa's work, but we have this other artist, her work is like half the price. So if you want that, that's awful.
Yeah.
And I've definitely, experienced some misogyny for sure. And, been told to go out and doll things up a bit more, things like that. So, or maybe not even doll up, because I put on lipstick for this. Like I will like do a thing here or there, but I'm not like going all out or anything, or like, really exposing myself or like, but I do what's comfortable. Like on my social media, I'm in my pajamas a lot painting, and people are like, I can't believe you're showing you in your pajamas. I'm like, but this is legitimately what I'm doing. I'm sorry, but it's 1,000,000 degrees always in my apartment, so even in the winter. But anyway, I've had galleries explicitly tell me to do even more over the top than that, like really like model, like the lighting stuff. I don't do that. So, so it's bottom line though is it's a lot like a relationship when you start working with a gallery. So you want to be able to trust each other and have open communication and enjoy each other's company and feel safe, and they should be able to sell your work. So
Yeah.
you don't want to be with a gallery where you're bringing all of the collectors in. That's the gallery's job.
Yeah.
And I do love working with galleries for that, because I do like selling I mostly love making paintings. That's my number one thing. But I like selling the paintings because then that means I can afford to make more paintings. So I always say to people, when you buy a painting, you're not just investing in the work of art, you're investing in the artist. Because now they can make more. One, you're validating them, and then they can make the next one. They can order more panels. They can make more paintings. They can travel to the next place. So every painting that they make from that point forward, you are a part of that story. So, I do sell directly in that way, but I prefer not to. I don't want to sell work. I want to paint work, and I love working with galleries so that they do that end of it, and they sell that story, and they do all of it. So yeah, and they create other opportunities. They, like I can get commissions through them, and they'll get me into a collection, or there's a lot of benefits to working with a gallery for sure.
No, I appreciate that. It's just as important to, even if you're just kind of touching upon some of the things that can be difficult with galleries, instead of just, saying, oh, it's been great and people always give you a chance and, it's nice to be seen, but things can go wrong. And it's always nice that we've had a conversation on this podcast a few times about what we call pay to play galleries, where you have to pay for the wall space. And we've been trying to warn people against those kinds of relationships, because it should be based on your relationship with the gallerist and not about, but the merit of the work instead of paying to have the wall space, really. But there we are. I work with a gallery. I don't, I exhibit in several galleries, but I work with one where I don't exhibit, where I produce videos for them. So I get to see the behind the scenes of a really good gallery, very successful one. So I'm fortunate enough to see how that operates, and then I can compare and contrast with galleries who don't put in that extra work, to just see how that can affect sales for an artist. Oh, look at this, a special guest has come on. So what's your little guy's name? What's his name?
Joel Fleischman.
Joel Fleischman.
He goes by Fleischman.
I love it. Oh,
sorry, go on.
No, it's all right. But yeah, so that's why I appreciate you sharing where things can go awry. But saying that, do you have any shows coming up that people should know about, and where should they see your work if they want to see it exhibited in person?
Sure, for sure. I have a handful of galleries that usually always have my work either up or definitely available for view. One of them has work up now, and it will be up through into the fall. Like they rotate their artists they represent. So right now I'm in a featured show, but they'll still have the work after for view through October, and that's in Maine, in Northeast Harbor, which is near Acadia National Park, and it's called Artemis Gallery. And there's a gallery I work with in New York City called Franklin Bowles. They're in Soho. And they always, from what I understand from people, I haven't been there in a bit, but the people are like, I just saw like a little solo show of your work. They have a gallery downstairs, which I think has a lot of my paintings out. So Franklin Bowles Gallery. I also have work with Gallery Hennick in Chelsea. So these are both in New York City. And they have, it's a large gallery, so they often have work up as well. But you can always go into these places and ask them. Another one is Carol Corey Fine Art in Kent, Connecticut. So these are all in the United States. And I have one painting, I think, in Newfoundland at James Baird Gallery. So if anybody's up in Canada, in Newfoundland, far. And Masoni Art is another one in Maryland that she has several of my small paintings. I really hope, and Wyndham Fine Art in upstate New York has some of my small upstate New York plein air paintings as well. So, and that's right. There's a show up there. I'm doing an artist retreat with other graduates from the New York Academy of Art. I'm the president of the Alumni Association there. So this is why I speak so highly of them. Yeah. I'm doing that because I love the community. But we have a show about our work for a retreat we do up there later this summer. And I will have work in the Art on Paper Fair for anybody visiting New York for the art fairs in September. I'll have work with Carol Corey Fine Art at Art on Paper during Armory Week in early September. And that's it concretely right now.
I should hope so. That's what, 8 things at least. 9 things. But all of those will be on the screen for any viewers, and all of the links to all of this will be in the description of the video and the audio platforms of the podcast. But aside from that, where online would you like viewers or listeners to go to support you, to see your work? Where should they go online if they can't make it in person?
The best place is certainly my website, which is lisalebofsky.com. And I have, you can subscribe for my newsletter. I don't send out a huge amount of emails, but when I do, they're really worth it. Yeah. I haven't done it lately, but I usually include a little section called Nature Facts. I'll also talk about, like the story about the table pine and how it actually needs fire to reproduce and so forth. So I'll have like little scientific facts about something in nature with a little painting accompanying it. So it's educational and informative. And so it's lisalebofsky.com. Subscribe to my newsletter. But then, of course, my Instagram, Lisa_Lebofsky. So, I think a lot of artists are experiencing it right now as of timing of this podcast. I think that platform's become a little bit more unreliable for me. I've noticed my engagements like all over the map. It's generally down, but then suddenly it's really up and then it's really down again. So I don't know what's happening there, which is why I'm encouraging more people to go to my website because that's tried and true and it's been around the longest. And I'm also on Threads, Lisa_Lebofsky. I have a Facebook artist page. It's Lisa Lebofsky Artist. That would be it. And of course, you can visit any of the galleries. They have pages for my work. And the links to all of them are on my website.
So have you not joined Cara yet?
I did. I was on it for a hot second. A cold second. I was like, okay, I guess everyone's doing this. I just didn't think it was... There's 2 issues I had with it. Number one, I kept trying to post and it kept saying there was a problem. So I couldn't even post. So maybe they fixed it by now. Yeah. I don't know. But I was just like, okay. And the other issue I had is it really seemed to be more for illustrators and designers than fine artists. And then the people that are on there are other artists, which is great. I love other artists for sure. But, I don't want to just connect with other artists.
You want a wider audience on there. Just that's the thing with Instagram, isn't it? Is most of your audience is not necessarily artists themselves who are posting regularly. So no, I completely understand. I only ask in case that all of a sudden does boost up and Instagram falls off. In the future, you never know. In 10 years' time, when this is still being watched,
let me see. What my screen name is. It's either Lisa_Lebofsky or it's Lisa Lebofsky.
All of my research will bring this out anyway.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I'll do all that work. It'll be on the screen. It'll be in the description. And obviously, I encourage everyone to go and check out Lisa's work. It's absolutely beautiful. And it's been such a wonderful conversation. You're so generous with your time. I really appreciate you being a guest.
Thank you. Thank you. And you have great questions. This is a great conversation. Thank you so much.
hope you enjoyed that episode. If you can support the podcast by leaving a like or a comment down below, that would really be great. But what we'd really like is if you're able to leave a review on the podcast channels, wherever you listen to it or download it, because that helps us get spread around the internet so that more people have access to us and able to see what we're making.
Also, follow us on Instagram, and we'd really appreciate it if you like and engage with our posts. Help get the podcast better known. Thanks for listening.